The letter arrived on a grey morning in the spring of 1873, and by the time Kalen Vosmir had read it twice, his hands were no longer steady. It was a plain thing, written in his steward's careful clerk's hand, the sort of report he received a dozen times a season and rarely finished. Rents collected, roofs mended, a bridge near the northern wood was washed out by the floods. And then, halfway down the page, almost as an afterthought, a single sentence that stopped his breath. Her Grace continues to reside quietly at Orelmere, where she gives instruction upon the piano to the children of the poor and seeks no assistance from the estate. He set the paper down on his writing desk and stared at the cold hearth for a long while. 3 years. 3 years later, Marigold had walked out of Vosmir House without a word of farewell, since the doors had closed and the servants had learned not to speak her name in his presence. He had imagined a great many things in those 3 years. He had imagined her in London drawing rooms, laughing behind a fan. He had imagined her married again, or scheming for the settlement she had never claimed. He had imagined in his blacker hours that she had forgotten him entirely. He had never once imagined her teaching poor children to play the piano in a village he could not find upon a map. Orelmere, he said aloud, as though the word itself might explain her. His valet, a discreet man named Hollis, who had served him since boyhood, glanced up from the wardrobe. "Your Grace? Pack a single trunk, nothing fine, the plainest coat I own, and the brown one besides." Kalen rose and went to the window, where the rain had begun again. "And tell no one where I have gone. Not my cousin, not my solicitors, no one." Hollis hesitated, which was unlike him. "And where shall I tell them you have gone?" "Tell them I have gone to take the waters," Kalen said. "Tell them I am unwell. It will not be a lie." He did not understand even then what he hoped to find. He told himself it was curiosity. He told himself a man had a right to know how his own wife disgraced his name in some forgotten corner of the country. But beneath those reasons, where he did not care to look, lay a question that had haunted him for 3 years, and which he had never dared to ask. Why had she taken nothing? Not the jewels, not the money, not the name she might have used against him. She had left him with everything and asked for nothing, and a woman who wanted nothing was a woman he had never learned to read. He arrived in Orelmere 4 days later, in the brown coat, with mud upon his boots and a false name upon his tongue. The village was smaller than he had pictured, a cluster of stone cottages gathered around a green, with a church at one end and a mill at the other, and the smell of wood smoke over all of it. No one looked twice at him. That, he found, was a strange and unfamiliar pleasure. All his life men had bowed and women had curtsied, and conversation had gone quiet when he entered a room. Here he was nothing. Here he was Mr. Ashcroft, a music tutor seeking modest work, and the innkeeper who took his coin called him Sir, with the same indifference he might offer any traveller. He found the Rowan atelier on his second morning. It was no atelier at all, only the front room of a tall, narrow house beside a great rowan tree, its door painted a faded green, its window full of light. He stood across the lane in the cold and watched the children go in. They came in 2s and 3s, in patched coats and darned stockings, some of them so small they had to reach up to lift the latch. And then, through the window, he saw her. Marigold. She was older. That was the first thing he understood, and it struck him with an unreasonable force, as though he had expected her to remain frozen, exactly as he had last seen her. There was silver now at her temple, where there had been none. Her gown was simple wool, grey and unadorned, the gown of a woman who worked, and yet she moved among those children with a grace he remembered in his bones, kneeling to button a coat, laughing at something a small girl said, her whole face open in a way it had never been open to him. He had married a guarded woman. He had been certain of it. He had spent 2 years of marriage convinced that whatever lay behind Marigold's calm and careful eyes was being kept deliberately from him. The woman in that window was not guarded at all. She had simply, he realized, been guarded against him. Kalen crossed the lane before he had decided to. "Forgive the intrusion," he said when she came to the door. He kept his hat low and his voice level, and he watched for the moment she would know him. "My name is Ashcroft. I am newly come to the district, and I am told you need a second hand here. I teach. The piano, chiefly, though I read the violin." Marigold studied him. For one terrible moment her gaze caught and held, and a small line appeared between her brows, and he was certain the whole fragile deception had collapsed before it began. Then the line smoothed. She had not known him. 3 years, and a beard he had not worn before, and a coat she had never seen had been enough. "We have no money to pay a tutor, Mr. Ashcroft," she said. "I will not pretend otherwise. The families here pay what they can, which is often nothing, and what little comes I spend on candles and on strings." "I did not ask for money," he said. She tilted her head, and something in her expression sharpened with an intelligence he had forgotten she possessed. "Then what do you ask for?" He had not prepared an answer. The truth rose up in him unbidden, and he was startled to find it nearly came out whole. "Because I cannot understand you, and it is killing me. Because you are the one account I never settled. Because I have been a wealthy man for 3 years, and I have never once felt as poor as I do standing in your doorway." "Occupation," he said instead. "I have lost a thing that mattered to me, Mrs. Vosmere, and I find that idleness is unkind to a grieving man. I would like to be useful." He saw the name strike her. Mrs. Vosmere. She had not corrected him, had not given him another, so she had not abandoned it after all. She had simply carried it here quietly, where no one knew what it had once meant. "We do not stand on grand titles here," she said at last. "The children call me Miss Marigold. You may begin tomorrow if you mean it. But understand me clearly." She stepped closer, and her voice dropped, and there was iron in it that he had never been permitted to hear. "These children have been failed by every grand person who ever promised them anything. If you intend to amuse yourself for a fortnight and then ride away now. I will not let them be one more disappointment in your idle life." "I have no intention of disappointing them," he said. It was, he thought as he walked back to the inn, the first honest promise he had made in years. He began the next morning and the morning after, and within a week the pattern of the place had closed around him like water over a stone. He had imagined, in his vanity, that he would teach. Instead, he learned. He learned that Marigold did not raise her voice, not once, not even when a boy named Pym played the same wrong chord 9 times running. He learned that she praised effort before result, that she sat beside the frightened ones rather than across from them, that she had a way of making a child believe that the music had always been inside them, and she was only helping them find the door. He watched her give a small girl her own gloves because the child's hands were too cold to play. He watched her go without her midday bread so that 2 brothers might share it between them and not know she had gone hungry. And he thought of the woman he had divorced in his heart 3 years before, and he could not make the 2 of them be the same person, and the trying of it kept him awake at night. But it was the blind boy who undid him. Tavian Rook was perhaps 11 years old, thin as a reed, with pale, clouded eyes that never quite found a face. He came alone each day, tapping along the lane with a smooth ash stick, and he was, without question, the finest natural musician Kalen had ever heard in any drawing room in London. He played by ear and by memory and by some third sense the sighted did not possess. He could hear a melody once and return it whole, and then return it changed, deepened, as though he had taken it inside himself and given back something truer. "He frightens the other tutors," Marigold told Kalen one afternoon, watching the boy work through a difficult passage of Chopin with his head tilted toward the keys. "They say he is uncanny. They say a child cannot understand grief who has lived only 11 years and seen nothing of the world. And what do you say? Kaelin asked. I say he has seen a great deal, she answered softly, only not with his eyes. Kaelin came to dread and to crave the hours he spent near Tavian, for the boy had a habit of going very still while he played, as though listening to something beneath the room, and afterward he would say things no child ought to be able to say. You sit too far from the piano, Mr. Ashcroft, Tavian told him once without turning. A man sits far from a thing when he is afraid to want it. I am not afraid of the piano, Kaelin said. No, the boy agreed, you are not. And he played on and said nothing more, and Kaelin's blood ran cold. It was on a grey afternoon in his third week, with rain ticking against the green door and the other children gone home, that the thing he had been circling finally arrived. Tavian was at the keys. Marigold stood at the boy's shoulder, guiding him through a piece she clearly loved, her voice low and warm, and Kaelin sat in the corner with a violin he was not playing, watching the lamplight move across her face. He had stopped pretending, even to himself, that he came here for occupation. Tavian's hands stilled upon the keys. He turned his clouded eyes toward the corner where Kaelin sat. Mr. Ashcroft, the boy said, may I ask you something? And you will not cross? You may ask me anything, Kaelin said. The room was very quiet. Marigold had gone still as well, her hand resting upon the boy's shoulder. You speak exactly like the man Lady Marigold still loves, Tavian said. The violin slid from Kaelin's hands. Marigold's face had gone white. The boy could not see her, could not see the tears that stood suddenly in her eyes, could not see her husband's mouth open and close upon nothing, but he had heard it. He had heard it all along, in the cadence of a stranger's voice, the thing that two grown and careful people had hidden from each other for 3 weeks and from themselves for 3 years. Tavian, Marigold said, and her voice broke upon the single word. I am sorry, the boy said, suddenly small and uncertain, hearing the catch in her breath. I only meant that you sound the same when you speak to her. There is a place in your voice that goes soft, and her voice goes soft to answer it, and I thought you must already know each other. I thought you were old friends. Go home, Tavian, Marigold whispered. It is raining. Go home, my dear, and we shall finish the piece tomorrow. The boy gathered his stick and his coat, and at the door he paused. I did not mean to make her cry, he said, to the room, to no one. She does not cry. In 3 years I have never once heard her cry. And then he was gone into the rain, tapping along the lane, and Kaelin and Marigold were alone for the first time since she had left him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence. How long have you known me? Kaelin said at last. Since the doorstep, Marigold answered. She had not turned to face him. She stood with both hands pressed flat upon the closed lid of the piano, as though it were the only solid thing in the world. Did you imagine a beard would hide you from me, Kaelin? I knew you before you spoke. I knew the way you held your shoulders in a doorway you were not sure of. I have known the shape of you in dim rooms for the whole of my marriage. You let me stay. I let you stay, she agreed. Now she turned, and her composure was a ruin, and he saw at last the full weight of what she carried. Because for 3 weeks I have had you back. Because in this room you have been kinder to these children than you ever knew how to be kind to me, and I wanted to see it. I wanted to know that the man I loved had been in there the whole time, only buried, only waiting for a quiet enough room. Was that such a great sin? Why did you leave? The question tore out of him, raw, the question of 3 years. You took nothing, you said nothing. You let the whole of London believe what they believed, that you had betrayed me, that you had married me for the title and grown careless of it. You let me believe it. Marigold, I cast you out. I stood in our own hall, and I told you I never wished to see your face again, and you did not defend yourself, not one word. Why? And there it was, the thing she had hidden, rising in her face like a body rising from deep water. He watched her decide in real time whether to lie to him once more. He watched her choose not to. "Because the man who ruined us," she said quietly, "was the man you loved most in the world. And I knew that if I told you the truth, it would break something in you that could never be mended. I thought my heart was the smaller price." The room seemed to tilt. "Aldous," he said, his cousin. His mother's sister's son, raised at Vosmere alongside him from the age of 6, closer than a brother, the one steady fixture of a lonely boyhood. Aldous, who had stood beside him at his wedding and wept, who had been the first to bring him word with such gentle sorrow of Marigold's supposed disgrace. "He came to me before the wedding," Marigold said. "You never knew. He came to me and he told me that he had loved me first, before ever you saw me, and that he would have me still if I would have the courage to break up with you. I refused him. I told him I loved you, and only you, and that I would never speak of it again, so that the two of you might never be set against each other." She drew a shaking breath. "He smiled at me, Kaelin. He smiled and he said that he understood, and that he hoped we would be very happy. And then, for 2 years, he set about making certain that we never could be. The letters," Kaelin said, "the forged correspondence that had appeared in his study, in a hand so like Marigold's own, the witnesses, the carefully arranged evening when he had returned early and found her in another man's company, a man he later could never trace. All of it. He built all of it. All of it," she said. "I found the proof too late, after you had already cast me out. A letter in his own hand to the man he had paid. By then the harm was done. I could have brought it to you. I could have ruined him as he ruined me, and won you back, and watched you learn that your brother in all but blood had hated you in secret your whole life." She lifted her chin. "I knew you, Kaelin. I knew that truth would not free you. It would only teach you that nothing you had ever trusted was real. So I let you keep him. I gave up my marriage so that you might keep your one happiness, and I went away, and I built a smaller life out of what was left, and I taught it to children who had never been promised happiness at all." Kaelin Vosmere, who had not wept since the death of his mother, put his face in his hands and wept. He did not go to her that night. He could not. There was too much in him. 3 years of misdirected anger curdling all at once into shame, and he was wise enough at last to know that a man drowning in his own feelings is no comfort to anyone. He walked the dark lanes of Orelmere until his coat was soaked through, and he understood slowly and terribly the full size of what had been done. Not only to him, to her. She had borne the contempt of a society that adored a wronged husband and despised a faithless wife, and she had borne it in silence to protect the very man who had wronged her, and she had asked nothing, and she had not even let herself be bitter, because bitterness, he saw now, would have poisoned the children she had given her life to instead. He resolved, walking in the rain, to make it right. He would expose Aldous. He would restore her name. He would stand in the same London drawing rooms and tell the truth until they believed it, and he would bring her home. He had forgotten, in his resolve, one essential fact. He had not been the only one to receive a letter. Aldous Vosmere arrived in Orelmere 3 days later. Kaelin saw the carriage from the window of the Rowan atelier, a fine black carriage utterly out of place in that village of carts and mud, and his heart turned over in his chest. Aldous stepped down, immaculate, smiling his gentle smile, and Kaelin understood in an instant the whole of it. The steward's report had been no accident. Aldous had arranged for him to learn where Marigold was. Aldous had watched him vanish from London and had followed, and now he had come to finish what 3 years had failed to finish, to ensure that the Duke and his cast-off wife could never find their way back to one another. One final betrayal set in motion the moment Kaelin first read her name upon that page. "Cousin," Aldous said warmly as Kaelin came out into the lane. "What a wretched little place. I confess I am relieved to find you alive. Half of London believes you have run mad." His eyes moved past Kaelin to the green door, to the figure of Marigold framed in the window, and the warmth in them did not reach them at all. And here she is, still playing the saint. How tiresome it must be to be so very good. "I know what you did," Kaelin said. Aldous did not so much as blink. "I am sure she has told you a great many things. She is a clever woman, Kaelin. She always was. I would not put it past her to have invented a whole new story now that you have come crawling back. She has had 3 years and nothing to do but refine it." For one cold instant, the old poison did its work. Kaelin felt the doubt move in him, the trained reflex of a man who had been taught for 2 years to mistrust his own wife, and he hated himself for feeling it. And then the green door opened, and it was not Marigold who stood there. It was Tavian. The blind boy had come to his lesson early, and he had heard the carriage, and he had heard the voice, and he stood in the doorway with his clouded eyes turned toward Aldous, and his small face white with recognition. "I know your voice," Tavian said. Aldous laughed, but the laugh had an edge now. "Send the urchin inside, Kaelin. This is hardly his affair." "You came before," Tavian said. He did not move. His voice was very clear and very steady in the cold air. "2 springs ago. I was sitting beneath the row and no one knew I was there because no one ever sees me. You came to the door, and you spoke to a man in a brown coat, and you gave him money, and you told him that if anyone ever asked, he was to say he had been Lady Marigold's lover in London. You told him to say it had been in the autumn. You said a sum. You said it twice, so he would not mistake it." The boy's chin trembled, but he did not stop. "I cannot see your face, sir, but I have never once forgotten a voice. And I have waited 2 years to tell someone, because I knew it mattered, and I did not know it was her until she told me her old name in her sleep one night when she thought no one could hear." The lane had gone utterly silent. Marigold had appeared in the doorway behind the boy, one hand pressed to her mouth. Aldous' smile was quite gone now. "The word of a blind beggar's brat," he said, but his voice had thinned. "Against mine. You cannot be serious." "I am perfectly serious," Kaelin said quietly. "And the boy is not all I have. You wrote to your man in your own hand, Aldous. Marigold kept the letter. She kept it for 3 years and never used it to spare me. I do not think I shall be so merciful." He stepped close to his cousin, the man he had loved as a brother, and he felt the love and the ruin of it together, an unbearable weight. "You took 2 years of my life and 3 of hers, and you nearly took the rest. Get into your carriage. Go back to London. By the time you arrive, every door you have ever flattered your way through will be closed to you. That is the truth I shall spend, cousin. That one." Aldous looked at him for a long moment, and whatever he saw in Kaelin's face told him it was finished. He turned without another word and climbed into his carriage, and the fine black thing rolled away down the muddy lane and out of all their lives, and the only sound left was the rowan tree moving in the wind. Tavian let out a long breath. "Did I do it right?" he asked. "I could not see if I did it right." Marigold went to her knees in the doorway and gathered the boy into her arms. "You did right," she said into his hair. "You did braver than any of us, my darling. You did it right." But the thing Kaelin had not foreseen, the cruelest turn of all, was that the truth did not mend it at once. He had imagined in his resolve that Marigold would fall into his arms the moment Aldous was disgraced. Instead, when the boy had been calmed and sent in to warm himself by the fire, she stood facing her husband in the cold lane, and her face was closed to him once more, and he understood that he had won the smaller battle and not yet the larger one. "You lied to me," she said. For 3 weeks you sat in my house under a false name and watched me. You watched me give my whole heart to those children, and you said nothing. You let me believe a stranger had come when it was you all along, deciding whether I was worth the trouble of forgiving. That is not why I came. I do not know why you came, she said, and her voice shook. That is precisely the wound, Kaelin. I never knew why you did anything. You cast me out without asking me a single question. And now you arrive in disguise, and you watch me as though I were a creature in a menagerie, to see whether I had earned my way back into your good opinion. Do you understand how that feels? To be on trial in my own life, by a man who never once let me speak in my own defense. He had no answer ready, and for once he did not reach for one. He stood in the rain and let her anger fall on him, all of it, all 3 years of it. And he did not flinch, and he did not interrupt, and he did not explain himself. He simply listened, fully, perhaps for the first time in the whole of their acquaintance. And when she had finished, when she stood spent and trembling before him, he said only the thing that was true. "You are right," he said. "I came to judge you. I am ashamed of it. I came to believe I was the wronged party, and I have spent 3 weeks in your house discovering that I was the small one, and you were the great one all along. I cannot give you back the years. I cannot say what I said in our hall. I can only tell you that I did not know how to love a person until I watched you love these children, and that if you send me away now, I will go, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to become the man you deserved before I knew you deserved him." Marigold looked at him for a long time. The rain had stopped. Somewhere behind the green door, a child began haltingly to pick out a melody upon the piano, the same simple piece she had been teaching the week he arrived. "Tavian taught himself that," she said at last, very quietly. "I never showed him the left hand. He found it on his own, listening. He says music is only the practice of paying attention to what was already there." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and a small and broken laugh escaped her. "I have spent 3 years teaching that boy to find light without his eyes, Kaelin. I did not think I was teaching it to you as well. Were you?" "I do not know yet," she said. But she did not send him away. That was the whole of it that day. She did not fall into his arms. She did not forgive him in the lane in the rain. But she did not send him away, and the next morning he returned to the Rowan atelier in his plain brown coat. And he took his place in the corner, and he taught the violin to a girl named Bess, who could not yet hold the bow. And Marigold let him stay. Forgiveness, he learned, was not a door that opened all at once. It was a thing built note by note, the way the blind boy built a melody, patient, attentive, returning each day to the same difficult passage until the hands remembered what the heart had decided. He courted his own wife slowly, in the village where no one knew he was a duke, and he found that he did not wish to be one. He found that he would rather be Mr. Ashcroft, who taught poor children and went home cold and useful, than the Duke of Vosmere, who had wanted for nothing and understood nothing at all. He took rooms above the mill. He sold a portion of his London estate quietly, and he did not tell her. And the roof of the Rowan atelier was mended before the next winter, and there were strings enough at last, and candles enough, and bread enough, that no one went hungry, and no teacher gave away her gloves. When she discovered his hand in it months later, she did not thank him. She only looked at him across the lamplit room, with something in her face he had waited 3 years and 3 weeks to see, and that was thanks enough to last him the rest of his life. The winter that Tavian Rook turned 14, the great concert hall in the county town opened its doors to a blind boy from a village no one could find upon a map, and he played a piece of his own making before 500 strangers, and not one of them breathed until he had finished. In the front row sat a tall, greying man in a plain coat, and beside him a woman in grey wool with silver at her temple, and they held hands like two people who had nearly lost the habit and had only lately found it again. 2 springs later, the green door of the Rowan atelier still opened each morning, and the children still came in 2s and 3s, and the rowan trees still moved in the wind. But there was a second teacher now, full-time, a man the village had long since stopped calling Mr. Ashcroft and had taken to simply calling Caelan, as though he had always belonged to them. He and Marigold had married again, quietly, in the small stone church, with the children for witnesses and Tavian at the piano, and no one in London ever quite understood why the Duke and Duchess of Vosmere chose to live in a narrow house beside a tree instead of the great cold rooms that were theirs by right. On a fine morning that spring, a small new pupil, frightened and stiff at the keys, asked Marigold why the tall teacher in the corner watched her so. Marigold smiled and did not look up from the child's hands. "Because he was lost for a great while," she said gently, "and he is only now learning to see. Now then, begin again, softly. The music has always been inside you. We are only looking for the door. If this story found its way into you, stay a while longer, for there is another waiting to be told."